Hello, we have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to try to do it as quickly as possible and still be slow enough that you can understand. But today I want to talk about how media affects communication. Now, new media is much faster than traditional media, so the way that we communicate has changed over the years, even from the time that I was younger. Now, with traditional media, it was much slower. It took a long time to write a letter, to send a letter, for the person to get the letter, and for them to read it. That took quite a bit more time. Even newspaper articles, the reporter would have to go to whatever was going on, get the information, and then go back and write it. They would have to print all of the stories together and then distribute it to the people. So that took a lot more time than what we have now. It also, we were limited in how many people we reached and where they were located. Most of the time they had to be fairly close in order for us to communicate with them. If they were further away, a lot of times there was no communication at all. There was also a lesser amount of information available to people. If the information that you needed or that people around you had, they could share that with you. But if the people who had information were a long ways away, sometimes it was very difficult to get that information. With the new media, it happens very quickly, sometimes literally as a situation is happening. We get information through the news, through our cell phones, things like that. The amount of information out there is endless. It is absolutely overwhelming. There's so much information. Now, new media tends to be, now this is not always, tends to be of a lesser quality simply because there's not as much clarity, there's not as much explanation, and there's not as much personal connection, okay? So that's just a little bit of some of the differences with traditional and new media, and I've told you several of those before, but I like to remind you of those. Media allows us to get information to others quickly and effectively. We hear about important news stories very quickly. As a matter of fact, there have been a couple of earthquakes in the United States, which we don't have nearly as many as you guys do, so it's kind of a big deal for us. And these have happened out in California, so even though I don't feel the earthquakes in Missouri where I live, I know people who live in California where these earthquakes have hit. And I've been able to follow the stories about how there was one that was a 6.4, and then there was a stronger one of a 7.1 that just happened just yesterday. So I got that information very quickly, even though I'm a long ways away from them. We also can share information with others more easily. Several of my friends just went on vacation to a beach, and there was a red tide, so the algae that makes it unsafe to swim and things like that. And so they were communicated to in many ways, but one of those was through television. They were able to hear that. Well, then they posted, so even though I'm not anywhere close to the beach, I still have that information. We can also use media to share information to those who are very far away, such as this class. I'm literally on the other side of the world, and yet we can still share information with each other. Sometimes, however, media can be unhealthy and unhelpful in communicating. There was a quote by a lady named Stacy Hankey in an article on Thrive Global where she said, "One survey revealed that 74% of millennials prefer conversing digitally rather than in person. And while this helps them communicate more efficiently, it diminishes their communication effectiveness." So in other words, they can communicate more and more quickly, but not as well. The more people use digital communication, the more personal communication skills decline. Our need for rapid bits of information replaces our ability to clearly express thoughts and ideas when speaking to other people. So what can we do about that? Okay, Number one, we need to understand that information in and of itself is not a bad thing. The fact that there is endless information, tons and tons and tons of information is not a bad thing. So we need to understand it is just information. Information, and the way we get it to each other is not a bad thing. Okay? The fact that there is information out there is not bad. Also, we need to understand that we can, misspelled that, sorry, cannot process all the information that exists. In other words, just because information is out there doesn't mean that we need it. It doesn't mean that we need to know it, and that it's okay if we don't have that information. 3, so we need to understand that information itself is not a bad thing. Understand that we cannot process all the information that exists, and we need to pay attention to what, that's a T, information, goodness, I'm having trouble writing today, we want and need. So in other words, sometimes this information is out there. Sometimes we realize that we can't process all of it, so we need to stay focused on the information that we actually need and want. Sometimes we can get distracted by information that we don't actually need. I was reading a story about how, or I was reading about things that are available on Amazon, and I didn't need any of those. That was not information that I needed. I could have just skipped the article, but I did take the time to read it. All right, so in this, we also need to make sure that we use media to send information and receive information, but, so we use media to send and receive information, but be aware of our present. So in other words, be aware of the moment that you're actually in. Don't be so obsessed with getting information that you miss out on being in a moment or in a situation. A lot of times we see this at weddings when everybody is out there taking pictures, but nobody's actually watching the wedding. They're all watching their phones. And so you can miss being there even though you were there, if that makes sense. So in other words, make sure that you're participating in an activity rather than just taking the information from it, okay, or sharing information from it. Making sure that we are participating in life and in situations.